Good afternoon, good afternoon. One of my favorite times of the year. Welcome to the Lindback Lecture. It is my privilege to gather with all of you today, and I want to do a special welcome and shout out to all of our online viewers. I'm hearing that our winner has many fans that are watching this online. Welcome to the Community College of Philadelphia, and welcome to the Lindback Lecture. Today we honor a faculty member who represents the very best of our institution's mission, a commitment to student success, academic rigor, and service to the community. It is my distinct honor to introduce the 2025 Lindback Distinguished Teaching Award recipient, Dr. Lisa Johnson, professor and department head of nursing. Dr. Johnson is more than an accomplished educator. She is a transformative force in the lives of all of her students. And I would say alumni, faculty, administrators, she is a force. In the classroom, in clinical settings, through her leadership, she challenges students to strive for excellence while grounding them in compassion, integrity, and purpose. Her work ensures that the next generation of nurses is not only highly skilled, but deeply committed to improving patient outcomes and advancing the health of our communities. Her journey is both distinguished and deeply relatable. Beginning her career at the college in 2010, Dr. Johnson has risen through the ranks from instructor to full professor and now department head, demonstrating unwavering dedication at every step of the way. As a proud community college graduate herself, she embodies the promise of access and opportunity, showing our students what is possible through perseverance, discipline, and vision. Beyond the classroom, Dr. Johnson's leadership and service has strengthened our institution in countless ways, from mentoring students and advising student organizations to shaping curriculum and advancing academic pathways in healthcare. Her professional contributions and continued pursuit of knowledge reflect a lifelong commitment to excellence. The Lindback Award is not simply a recognition of teaching, it is a recognition of impact. Dr. Johnson's impact is profound, lasting, and far-reaching. She inspires not only her students, but her colleagues and this entire community. Yes, I think that deserves an applause. And I want to say personally, I hate to tell numbers because I'm a math person, and when I say a number, then people probably calculate, or they should be calculating, age and those types of things. But let's say that I've been in higher education for more than 25 years. And Dr. Johnson is really a true example of an educator. She is someone who brings her passion to our students, her commitment, her caring nature. When you have a conversation with Dr. Johnson, you know that she's coming from the lens of what's best for students. You know that she cares about the outcomes of her students, and you know that she's going to be there not just in the classroom, but outside the classroom. And if you've ever had a chance to be at a nursing pinning ceremony and you see the love, the admiration, and that commitment that is reflected in the eyes of the students and the alumni when they walk across that stage, and the love for this woman right here, that's what it's all about. And I am very pleased and honored to be the president and to work with Dr. Johnson. I've worked with her for a few years, but I have seen excellence in motion and commitment and support for our students in ways that It's not common to see that everywhere. And so we have a gem, and we're honored to have you with us on the faculty, Dr. Johnson, as an administrator, as a leader, and as a faculty member who pours into your students. So thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing your lecture today.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. So before I begin, I do want us to take a moment to reflect. Think of one person who helped shape who you are today as a learner or as a professional. Someone who made you feel seen, supported, or challenged in a meaningful way. You don't need to say their name, just picture them. Give you a second to figure it out. All right, you have the person? Now let me ask you, with a show of hands, or if you're online, a raised hand icon or a quick yes in the chat, how many of you noticed the impact right away? Okay. Now, how many of you realize their importance over time, sometimes way later? That difference matters. Often, the people who shape us most don't do so in a single moment. Their influence becomes visible over time. When we look back and realize how they helped steady us, how they created a space for us, or challenge us before we were fully ready. When we hear the phrase big picture, we often imagine something different. But what if the big picture isn't something to be found later? What if the big picture is right here? Students, faculty, staff, administrators, guests, and alumni, you aren't pieces of the big picture. You are the big picture. And because teaching and learning never happens in abstract, but always between people and context, the next thing that matters is understanding who is in the room right now. So rather than doing a traditional icebreaker, we're going to create a living picture. So in a moment, I'm going to ask everyone to stand. And if you're online, I'm going to ask you to put your role in the chat, but don't hit send yet. Here's what I'd like you to do. If you are faculty, I want you to move to the left of the room. If you are staff, move to the right of the room. If you're a student, I want you to move to the center of the room. If you're administrator or leadership, move to the back of the room. And if you're a guest or alumni, move to the front of the room. So you know what we're going to do? All right. You ready? On the count of 3, move to your spot and hit send if you're online. Yeah, left that way, right that way. Pick which one you feel today. So students in the center, staff to the right, faculty to the left, leadership in the back, guests and alumni up front. That's all right. You're all right. You can. Well, we struggled a little. It's all right. So what I want you to do now is take a look around. What we've just done is we've created silos. Each group makes sense by itself, but what we're seeing right now is a fragmented picture. Roles separated, perspectives contained, pieces that don't yet connect. This is often exactly how our classrooms operate, by role, by function, by responsibility. But here's the shift. I want everyone to find one person from a different group, just one, and give them a quick high five, wave, or greeting. And you can move around. That's the connection right there, is the first line of the masterpiece. So now when you look around, you see everybody mingling together. That's when learning deepens. You can all take your seats again. Thank you. It's where understanding expands and where the big picture starts to come into focus. When we look at the mix, we had different perspectives, different roles, one shared space. What we just created, though, wasn't a final picture. It was movement. It was connection. It was pieces beginning to rearrange. And that's important because learning doesn't fully arrive formed. It doesn't snap into place all at once. It develops. When we look at research and learning science consistently shows that prior experience, role identity, motivation, and sense of belonging shape how new information is processed and remembered. The same message can land very differently depending on who receives it. That's why good teaching doesn't begin with content. It begins with people and context. And that is the idea of today's topic, connection with people and context. Now, before we move forward, I do need to take a moment to pause, as there's many people in this room who I need to thank because this presentation wouldn't be here without them. They did a lot of work behind the scenes to get me here. That includes the office staff who supported the planning process, Alicia and the nursing students and nursing faculty who helped decorate the frames, the former Lindback Award recipients who offered encouragement and perspective, and colleagues both locally and overseas who are joining us here and online today. Finally, I do need to thank my family, especially my son and his wife, because they were the inspiration for the theme today. This work wouldn't exist without all of you, with all the people in this room and those who are connected to it. The students who asked questions that didn't have easy answers. The colleagues who supported my ideas that were still under construction. The leaders who made space for experimentation, growth, and learning. I didn't become the educator I am today because I understood the big picture right away. I became the educator today because people helped hold the camera steady while I learned to take the picture, sometimes while I was absolutely pointing it in the wrong direction. So when I think of a Polaroid picture, people would take a picture and then gather around, holding a small square of paper, waiting. At first, there's nothing. It's just darkness. You couldn't rush it. You couldn't fix it. You had to trust the process. How many of you students have heard me say, trust the process? I have 14 years of data that it works. But what really struck me was at my son's wedding with the Polaroid camera, it wasn't about the technology. It was about the environment. People were relaxed, connected, present. There was laughter and conversation while they waited for the image to develop. There wasn't any frustration. It was shared. That moment stayed with me because that very same photograph, taken in a different context, under pressure, in isolation, without trust, would feel very different. And learning works the same way. Education isn't about uncovering a hidden picture or producing a perfect snapshot. It's about developing a person over time, under the right conditions, with the right people, and with patience for what is still becoming. The Polaroid didn't develop because it was a high-quality equipment. It developed because the conditions were right. That's why context matters, why relationships matter, why learning can't be separated from the environments we create for it. So today, through this story, we're going to move from the shadows of the darkroom into the clarity of the big picture. Throughout the presentation, I will be weaving stories and research, because stories help us find meaning, research helps us trust it. Together, they help us understand not only what learning looks like, but how and why it actually works. So let's begin. So before clarity can begin, there's darkness. And in that darkness, learners are asking quiet questions. Do I belong? Does this matter? Do I matter? Look around your campuses. How many people are sitting in the shadows, not failing, but waiting? Their silence isn't disengagement, it's uncertainty. And sometimes we deepen that uncertainty in the name of rigor. Many students might recognize this moment, that first day of class when someone told you, look to your left, look to your right. One of you won't be here at the end of the semester. But no content has been taught yet. No expectations explained. But the message was already clear. Belonging is conditional, and learning is a test of survival. From a neurobiological perspective, when belonging is unclear, the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, stays active and it elevates cortisol, which suppresses the prefrontal cortex and makes higher order thinking much harder. In other words, when the brain doesn't feel safe, it prioritizes survival over learning. So darkness isn't failure, it's the nervous system protecting itself. So before anyone can step out of darkness, something has to happen first. That's not clarity, it's not rigor, it's not motivation, but it's safety. No one comes out of the shadows because the light is bright enough. They come out because they know it's safe. And this is what the camera strap represents. The camera strap is the first assurance that movement is possible, that risk won't end in loss. The strap allows the photographer to lean over ledges, to move through crowds, even to let go of the camera for a moment, without fear that it's going to crash to the ground. For students, the camera is their education, and they're terrified of dropping it. The same concept is true in learning. When someone is sitting in uncertainty, wondering if they belong, if they matter, they're afraid to raise their hand to ask a question. The thing that brings them out of the darkness is not information, it's the strap. The strap matters most when someone's slipping, because learning, like photography, is rarely done with steady hands the first time. The strap is the first point of contact that says, I see you, I got you, you're safe to move forward. Safety also means knowing that a misstep won't define you, that correction is part of the process, not proof that you don't belong. Research across education and organizational settings consistently finds that technology and automation can increase efficiency. However, access alone isn't enough. Without relational assurance, people hesitate, they disengage, or they second guess whether that support is truly meant for them. Human connection remains the strongest predictor of trust, persistence, and meaningful engagement, especially in moments of uncertainty. Only when the strap is present do we feel the shift. We start to sit up, we lean in, we risk looking through the lens. We become the strap for each other when doors are open, when questions are welcomed, not judged, when people are guided instead of redirected, and when policies reflect real lives, not just ideal ones. So let's take a moment and take this idea of the camera strap and make it practical. When we talk about support in learning, we often use the same word, but we don't always mean the same thing. Sometimes support shows up after something has gone wrong. Other times it shows up before a fall ever happens. So let's test the difference. I'm going to read a few scenarios. If it's reactive, meaning support that waits for failure, I want you to shout net. If it's proactive, meaning that support prevents the fall in the first place, I want you to shout strap. If you're online, put an R for reactive in the chat or a P for proactive in the chat. You ready? First scenario, sending an email after a student fails the midterm. Reactive, net, yes. Second one, defining what participation actually looks like in the class on the first day. Very good, strap. Assuming students know who to contact until something goes wrong. Net, very good, net. Clarifying processes after confusion leads to an error. Net. And the last one, checking workload and clarity during periods of change. Strap. So most of us don't intend to rely on nets, but without realizing it, we often build systems that do. And here's where the next piece matters. Even if the strap is strong, even when people feel safe, learning can still stall if they don't know where to focus their attention. Safety allows movement, but clarity gives direction. And that's why the next part of the camera matters, the lens. The lens is the tool that determines what comes into focus, what fades into the background, and what actually makes sense. Learning works the same way. Without a clear lens, people aren't failing, they're guessing. They're asking questions like, what am I supposed to be looking for? What's important here? How do I know what matters and what doesn't? I see this all the time when I ask students how they approach reading, studying, or preparing for an exam. I'll ask, how do you know what you're looking for? Or, how do you decide what's important? And most of the time, the answer I get is, I don't know, or whatever the faculty stressed in class. This response isn't laziness, though. It's a lack of focus cues. From a neurobiology standpoint, this matters because the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for focus, working memory, and reasoning, has a limited capacity. When learners don't know what to prioritize, working memory gets overloaded. It's trying to sort out noise from importance, leaving less cognitive energy available for learning itself. That's what we call a smudged lens. Not that the content is too difficult, but that everything feels equally important, which means nothing sticks and the image never quite comes into focus. This is where simple, explicit learning strategies make a powerful difference. When we give students a way to organize attention, things like frameworks, processes, or guiding questions, we're not telling them what to think, we're helping them know where to look. In some fields, these lenses are built right into the profession. For example, in nursing education, the nursing process, assess, diagnose, plan, implement, and evaluate, gives students a structured way to approach complex information. It helps them ask, what comes first? What matters most? What do I do with what I'm seeing? That structure doesn't necessarily make learning easier, but it does make it possible. A clear lens sounds like, here's what matters right now. Here's how this connects to what you already know. Here's how you'll know you're on the right track. Clarity like this doesn't lower standards, it provides focus. So let's test how clear our lenses are with a quick activity. I want you to think about your specific role, your class, your office, or your program. Turn to the person next to you, or if you're online, jot it down and share it in the chat. I want you to answer the following question in 10 words or less. Why should a student take your class or come to your office? You have about 20 to 30 seconds. Go. So, how are we doing? Were we able to answer the question in 10 words or less? If you struggle to say it in less than 10 words, it doesn't mean that your work lacks value. It means that the lens may be blurry. Clarity isn't about marketing or simplifying important work. It's about helping learners focus their limited attention on what actually matters. A clear lens helps people understand not just why they're doing, but why it's worth doing. Even with a strong strap, though, and a clear lens, learners still need help orienting themselves moment to moment. They need to see the path, not all at once, but clearly enough to take the first step. That's where the next part of the camera comes in, the flash. The flash doesn't stay on. It doesn't overwhelm. It simply illuminates what matters, right when it matters most. The flash is when a teacher pauses before starting a new lesson. One image, one question written on the board, one clear destination for the day. The light comes on just long enough for students to see where they're headed. They can picture the task, they know what matters, they're oriented before they move. Clear goals, clear pathways, clear expectations. In moments like this, the flash does its job. It reveals the path without overwhelming the eyes. It gives just enough light to begin. But not all light helps. Sometimes the information is too much, too fast, all at once. And if we're not careful, the very thing meant to reveal the path can actually make it harder to see. That's where the next moment takes us. The blinding light. Blinding light overwhelms attentional systems and it forces the brain to filter instead of integrate. In photography, an overpowered flash washes out the image. Details disappear, depth is lost. Learning works the same way. Think about the first day of class. A room full of strangers, syllabi the size of a mini notebook, numerous policies, deadlines, consequences. Now multiply that times 3 courses. The rigor is real, but before students know where they belong, the brightness overwhelms. The question we need to ask ourselves is this: are we providing a high-definition roadmap for success, or are we flooding the room with light and hoping people adjust? Good illumination is paced, layered, responsive. It reveals just enough so the next step is clear. So let's check how clear our lenses are. Think back to when you first stepped foot into a higher education institution. What are some of the terms that you found confusing? And you can just shout them out. Syllabus. Yeah. SLOs. Anything else? Credit. Other things like the bursar, critical thinking, prerequisite, co-requisite. These terms aren't confusing because students aren't paying attention. They're confusing because no one has turned the light on long enough to explain why they actually mean in this context. These aren't personal failures, they're lighting failures. Lighting failures happen when language is familiar to insiders but foreign to learners, or that learners are expected to navigate systems or expectations before they can see them. To overcome lighting failures, we can name the term and its function, define it in context, but also normalize confusion. So an example of this could be, instead of saying check with the bursar, you can say try the bursar. That's where they handle bills and payments. This is where tuition questions can get resolved. So everything we've discussed matters, but none of it creates an image on its own. In photography, the image forms when the photographer presses the shutter. The click in the moment, something moves a possibility to action. That click is agency. From a brain science perspective, agency activates dopamine pathways that reinforce motivation and strengthen learning, especially when risk is low and recovery is supported. Agency tells the brain, this is worth engaging in. So when learners ask a hard question, try something unfamiliar, or take a risk they're not sure will work, they're pressing the button. So here's the question we need to ask ourselves. Have I empowered the learner to take the shot? If they're afraid to click, the film stays blank, not because the camera is broken, not because the lens isn't clear, but because the moment of action feels unsafe, and no one takes great pictures while bracing for impact. And this isn't just about students. Faculty press the shutter when they experiment with new approaches. Staff press it when they advocate or reimagine systems. Administrators press it when they're developing new policies. The big picture doesn't develop because someone else presses the button for us. It develops when we feel safe enough, supported enough, and prepared enough to press the shutter ourselves. So this is your time to claim your shot. Think of a moment this term when you could have pressed the shutter instead of waiting. You don't have to share it, just hold it. But now's your time to press the shutter. Agency turns possibility into motion. Now, once we press the shutter and the shutter clicks, the image still has not developed. Invisible chemicals begin to react. slowly pulling the image out of gray and into clarity. A Polaroid needs time, the right environment, and chemistry to develop its full range of colors. Learning does too. The brain best learns when it feels safe. In high stress, high cortisol environments, where learners are dealing with imposter syndrome, financial pressure, workload overload, personal and family stress, uncertainty, learning becomes biologically difficult. So development then depends on three essential chemicals: connection, transparency, and feedback. Each plays a different role. Each must be present, and each must be given time to work. But chemistry only works when elements can actually connect. So we need to ask, am I giving the chemicals time and opportunity to react, or am I rushing the development? Without time, without the right environment or intentional choices, the image may remain dark or distorted, but the potential is still there. When we get this right, the image begins to appear slowly, clearly enough where we begin to see who people are becoming. Let's take a deeper look into these chemicals. Look at these images. In the first image, you see a student in a small boat navigating massive land masses, each one representing content, skills, and expectations that are expected to be mastered. The learner is moving, they're trying, they're working hard, but everything feels oversized and disconnected. There's no clear route, just effort without direction. This is what learning often feels like before connection happens. I see it when students tell me they know nothing about a subject, not because they lack experience, but because no one has helped them see how their experience counts. For example, I once asked students who were struggling with the respiratory system in anatomy and physiology what they already knew. They said nothing. So instead of starting with diagrams or terminology, I reminded them that they breathe every day. And I said, how can you connect the fact that you breathe every day to what you're learning in anatomy and physiology? So they paused. It took them a little bit, but they started to connect the experience of breathing to oxygen exchange, how infectious respiratory diseases interfere with something that they rely on daily. The content didn't get smaller, but suddenly it wasn't floating. It had an anchor. It was connected. It was making sense. The same thing happens outside the classroom. When an advisor helps a student see how one confusing requirement fits into a longer pathway, or when a financial aid conversation reduces enough stress to allow focus to return. The land masses don't disappear, but a route begins to emerge. That's when effort turns into direction, and that's when learning can finally take shape. Now look at the second image. It's a brain packed with books and loose papers. You know, like the drawer or closet in your house where you put everything you don't know what to do with. Then, all of a sudden, you need that information. You know it's there, so you're digging, you're throwing things over your shoulder, you're making a mess just to find one useful idea. That's what learning looks like without connection. The brain holds information, but without organization, so retrieval is slow. Transfer breaks down. This isn't a failure of ability, it's a failure of connection. Missing connections don't erase learning, they delay it. They exhaust the learner. So the real question isn't whether content was delivered, but were bridges built between the pieces. That brings us to the next slide, the power of connections and the strategies that turn scattered information into a clear, navigable map. Meta-analyses consistently show that teacher-student relationships and peer connections are among the strongest predictors of engagement and persistence. Social connection releases oxytocin and dopamine, neurochemicals that increase trust, motivation, and memory encoding, making learning in relationship far more sustainable than in isolation. So when we look at how we can build these connections, we can start with a previous exposure check-in. What this looks like is at the start of a lesson, an instructor pauses and asks, before we move on, What, if anything, feels familiar here? And what feels new or fuzzy? Students start to realize confusion is expected, but not a personal failure, and prior knowledge finally can take its place. When we think about office hours, many students hesitate to attend office hours because they say they don't know what to ask, or they feel like they're inconveniencing faculty because they know we're busy. The result isn't silence, and it doesn't change the need. So ways that we can change that is call it student drop-in time or student success hours, or say to students, you don't have to have a reason to come see me. Stop by and say hello. Even if you don't know what to say, once the conversation starts, questions emerge, and over time they return to the office more with growing confidence. Then you have the student who you notice change in behavior. Maybe they're not coming to class, they're late all the time. This is where the reach-in email can be helpful. Instead of waiting, the instructor sends a short note. I noticed you haven't been around. Just checking in. Is everything okay? The student responds, a barrier dissolves, support arrives before consequences. You also have the option of a physical handoff. This is helpful for students when they reach a crisis mode. If in the beginning of class you give a physical handoff, which is a small card with guiding questions or framework, not grades or orientation, but it's something tangible they can hold on to so that when they can't think because of their crisis mode, it gives them a starting point. It tells them, I now know where to begin. Then you have your why announcement. Students need to know, what's the purpose behind this? Is this just busy work, or is this going to benefit me in some way? So one of the ways that I use the why announcement is particularly with lateness, and my nursing students know they have trouble with lateness. And they often think we're being nitpicky with clinical warnings and things like that. But I explain to them, in the professional world, lateness will cost you your job. And that I've seen good nurses be fired simply because they didn't get to work on time. It gives them an understanding that this isn't just a random rule, but there is a reason behind that rule. The next one, the staff first greeting. This is for my staff members here. You're often the first point of contact, answering phones, greeting at desks, welcoming both faculty and students into shared spaces. These early moments shape the tone and trust. A clear, warm interaction becomes the initial flash that signals belonging, clarity, and safety before any instruction or policy is enforced. And finally, we have peer support partnering. Intentional study groups or peer partnerships create built-in accountability. Someone notices when you don't show up. Someone asks, how is it going? But beyond accountability, peers offer different ways of explaining things, helping concepts land more effectively. Most importantly, peer support reduces isolation. Learning becomes shared work, strengthening belonging as well as understanding. Then there's transparency. Transparency answers a critical question. Is this environment predictable enough to be safe? Am I providing clarity and shedding light on the why, or am I leaving them in the darkness? When expectations are unclear, the brain expends energy guessing instead of learning. So transparency means naming unstated norms. So saying out loud, I welcome disagreement. How we disagree matters more than whether we do. Or stating, asking questions doesn't slow the class down. It tells me where the class is, so I know where to start. We also need to address assumptions, pausing to explain how to read feedback. For example, many students believe that their feedback should be based off of how much time they spent doing the assignment. And so explaining that more time doesn't automatically mean better work. Strategic effort matters more than volume. By explaining the why, students have purpose. Things don't seem arbitrary. It looks like having an annotated syllabus. So instead of just listing a bunch of policies, Explain the reason behind them, why it matters. It looks like clear how-to guides, step-by-step guidance. How do you condense a video so that it'll upload in Canvas? How do you participate? What's the definition of participate for you in this classroom? How to prepare. So success isn't dependent on prior insider knowledge. And finally, purpose, task, criteria, frameworks. This framework is a good template to help explain why assignments exist. Each assignment tells them what the purpose is, not just for this class or this degree, but where it's going to take them outside of school as well. It gives them detail as to what the task is, what are they being asked to do, and finally, it makes the criterion of evaluation clear. There's nothing left to guess. There's also nothing when they try to come back and say, well, I didn't know I had to do this. It's very clearly listed for them. Then we have feedback. Feedback matters because it creates motion, not judgment. Research shows feedback has a strong positive impact on learning, but unclear or delayed feedback can actually stall progress. Used well, feedback accelerates development. Used poorly, it corrodes it. However, there's a third risk that we often don't talk about: no feedback at all. When feedback is absent, the brain doesn't necessarily assume that everything is okay. It fills in the gap with uncertainty. Without feedback, learners don't know how to adjust. Effort increases, but direction doesn't. Anxiety rises as people try to meet your standards. Silence doesn't protect learning, it stalls it. The brain responds best when feedback focuses on behavior, not character, when it's timely, specific, and actionable, when it aligns with clear criteria and it invites assessment first. But to do this, we need psychological safety. Feedback that threatens identity shuts learning down. For example, in learning environments, not all inappropriate behavior is defiance. Sometimes it's confusion. Sometimes it's exhaustion. Sometimes it's a bad day spilling into the room. And sometimes it's someone testing boundaries because the boundaries were never made clear. Behavior tells a story before it proves character. When we treat every misstep as a punishable offense, we send the message that learning is conditional and that recovery is risky. When we develop, doesn't happen, let me start that over. And development doesn't happen by avoiding mistakes. It happens by learning how to respond to them. So grace doesn't ignore the behavior, and it doesn't lower expectations. It means that there's curiosity before consequence. Grace sounds like, help me understand what is happening here. Let's talk about what professionalism looks like in this set space. That didn't go as well as we hoped, but we can still change course. That shift matters because when learners believe every mistake defines them, they stop experimenting. And when they stop experimenting, the shutter never clicks. When feedback invites revision and growth, it also allows reciprocal learning to occur. Early in my career, students put on my evaluation that I was disorganized. I was not happy. I took it personally. I was actually angry at first. But when I let the emotion settle down and I reflected, the students were right. I had just started my doctoral degree. I was still practicing as a nurse and I was teaching lab. I knew those skills. I did them every day in practice. But what I realized was just because I knew those skills, it didn't mean that I was good at organizing them in a way that others could learn. That insight changed my practice. So think of constructive feedback as the North Star of learning. Without it, people aren't learning, they're lost. And remember, when these chemicals are out of balance, when connection weakens, transparency fades, or feedback disappears, learning slows and loses momentum because people are receiving mixed signals about what matters. This is what we call the double exposure warning. In photography, double exposure happens when images overlap on the same frame. Instead of clarity, you get confusion. Instead of focus, distortion. Learning works the same way. When connection is inconsistent, transparency unclear, or feedback missing or misaligned, the brain stops learning. It overworks, and that's when we see the blur. Students, faculty, staff, and administrators receive too many signals at once. High expectations with unclear pathways. Support offered, but hard to access. Nothing comes into sharp focus. Then comes the shadow effect. People begin to assume they're the problem. They hesitate. They stop participating. They stop asking questions, not because they don't care, but because mixed signals feel risky. Over time, there's a cost, the neurobiological toll. Chronic uncertainty keeps the brain at a heightened stress state. Cortisol stays elevated. Memory weakens. Learning becomes exhausting instead of generative. Double exposure isn't a failure of motivation or ability, it's a systems problem. To address this systems problem, we have to look at how learning is structured. So take a look at these two images. The first image is a vending machine, but instead of snacks, it's filled with books and information. This is how learning is often structured. You put in money and effort, and content drops out. Sometimes it's what is needed, sometimes it's not. And sometimes it gets stuck and you're standing there shaking the system. Sometimes we choose what looks appealing, like taking an online course, even though I know I can't stay focused or pay attention. Sometimes we guess what we'll need later, and sometimes we take whatever falls out, even if it's not what actually nourishes understanding. However, if you consider a potluck dinner, everybody brings something different. Experience, culture, work history, questions, perspectives. It adds flavor to the learning experience. This is what a connected learning environment looks like. If you only eat what the professor cooked, you may leave malnourished. You miss the richness, the nuance of how ideas function in the real world. Learning deepens when knowledge is shared, combined, and tested across perspectives. So that then takes us to what happens when the big picture changes. Sometimes the big picture will change, but not because something went wrong, but because you're headed somewhere new. When direction changes, networks must adjust. Ask yourself, does my current network support where I'm going or where I've been? Try to seek new chemistry. Clarify unstated norms. Ask future-focused questions. Change in direction doesn't mean you lost the big picture. It means it's evolving. And when you adjust the lens of your network with intention, aligning connection, transparency, and feedback with where you're headed, the image comes back into focus. Brighter, clearer, truer to who you're becoming. And that takes us to the final print. In photography, the final print is what we see, but it's shaped by everything that came before it. The darkness, the strap, the lens, the light, the chemicals, the choices, the moments of courage it took to press the shutter. Education works in the same way. The final print isn't a grade. It isn't a credential. It isn't even a job title or position. The final print is the person becoming visible. Education has never been just about delivering content. It's about connection, clarity, and growth for our students and for ourselves. Every interaction we choose matters. Every door we open, every expectation we make clear, every moment we help someone see how the pieces fit together. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What connections will you make starting now? Whether you are a student, faculty member, staff, or administrator, you are not just part of the picture, you are helping develop it. And that leads us to the final transformation. When you look at this image, start on the left. Here, the learner is the subject of the system. Norms are unstated, feedback is generic, the hidden curriculum is invisible. Learning is happening, but it feels unfocused, and effort doesn't yet feel productive. At this stage, the message, "you are the big picture," matters because it's what's needed to move to the right. It says, "you belong here, you matter. This system is meant to support you." As we move to the center of the image, notice what changes. Connections start to become transparent. Feedback becomes specific. Support becomes actionable, and the lens appears. This is where learning stabilizes, where effort gains direction and persistence becomes possible, not because the student is doing more, but because meaning is finally coming into focus. And then, on the right, something essential shifts. The learner is no longer just the frame. They're holding the camera. This is when it becomes, "I am the big picture," instead of "you are the big picture." Because focus is intentional, support hasn't disappeared, but it's now internalized. Confidence is no longer borrowed, it's owned. The subject becomes the photographer. That's why you'll leave today with 3 small reminders. The first is a camera-shaped stress ball that says you are the big picture. It's for moments of overwhelm when the scene feels too large and the pressure tightens. It reminds you that you can pause, steady yourself, and adjust the frame. The second is a magnet that says, "I am the big picture." This stays, it sticks. It represents what happens when reassurance becomes recognition and agency comes from within. And the third is the frame. The frame is what holds everything together. It's a reminder that learning and people don't exist without context, that clarity, connection, feedback, and care are not extras. They are the boundaries that make growth possible. Together, these 3 takeaways mark the journey from "you are" to "I am" to "I see" and shape the whole frame. Together, they mark the journey from support to self-determination. So I'll leave you with one final question. What will you change tomorrow because you no longer see yourself as the subject in the picture, but as the photographer? Because when "you are" becomes "I am," the image sharpens, and learning becomes something we don't just receive, but something we create together. So thank you. Questions? No questions? All right. Thank you all. I really appreciate you coming today. And don't forget to take your takeaways off the table. The staff worked really hard decorating frames for you all.
We have a question from the Zoom.
Okay.
How do the lens and framework of DEI help students feel a sense of belonging?
Let me make sure I heard the question. How does the lens and framework of DEI help students feel a sense of belonging?
Yes.
Okay. That's a great question. So when we frame things from a DEI standpoint, I like to start with the diversity part. And diversity is bigger than what many people focus it on. It's not just race or gender, but it's diversity of thought. And so when we're willing to be open to hear diversity of thought, it opens us up for one, learning, but it also creates equity because it shows that everybody has something to contribute to the learning experience, and then they feel included because of that. Any other questions? All right. Thank you again. I appreciate all of you.
Just before you leave, let's give Dr. Lisa Johnson one more hand clap. And I'll briefly say on behalf of Dr. Marshall, who had to step away, and my Dr. Linda Powell's voice, OMG. Would you agree? Would you agree? What a perfect execution of the art and science of teaching and learning. We really appreciate your lecture today. We thank you for your expertise, all the information that you've shared with us today, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you.